Hey there, welcome to my YouTube channel. I'm Hannah. Today I wanted to talk a little bit about the number one thing that might be holding you back from true love. The number one thing that I see that holds people back from finding true love, finding that real love that they may be looking for, is this fear of being alone. And that might sound counterintuitive, but I work with a lot of clients in my private practice who are wanting to be in a relationship and who have experienced prolonged singleness and are at varying stages of being okay with that. And I think that this thing about being afraid of being alone can actually be really pervasive in that it can impact so many different areas of life and behavior, the way you're choosing to act about certain things. There are a number of different reasons why you might be afraid to be alone. So the first one could be trauma. After a traumatic incident, beliefs can become really extreme and exaggerated. So trauma in relationships can also exaggerate the consequences of being alone, or the fear of those consequences. And oftentimes it can feel unsafe to be alone. It can also feel, catch-22 here, it can also feel unsafe to be in a relationship. Trauma is a little bit different here. It can impact not only the way you're thinking about something, but the way somebody does choose to act, the behaviors that they engage in based on feeling safe and how that shows up in romantic relationships. So the second area that I really do think strongly informs this fear of being alone is attachment. Now, attachment is something that is formed when you are a toddler, when you're a child. And so you don't necessarily remember some of these formative experiences, but those experiences as a child, as a baby, as a toddler, they form and shape your attachment style. Now, there are a couple of different types. There's anxious attachment, avoidant attachment, there's a disorganized attachment, and then there's a secure attachment. Now, there might be one or two others that are starting to be created, but those are the primary ones. Attachment wounds can actually keep you searching for love from people who activate that wound. So that might be fairly counterintuitive too. You're like, if someone makes me feel anxious or is rejecting my asks for connection, why would I want to be with them? And that's because it can actually activate that really old wound, that attachment wound. And there's something familiar about that. There's something that feels almost confirming. This is confirmation bias a little bit here. Attachment can profoundly impact your ability to be by yourself and the relationships that you choose. Because if you have an anxious attachment, being alone can be really difficult because there is this really extreme, intense fear of people leaving you, of being alone. Okay, the third area that I think can really inform this fear of being alone that prevents you from having a relationship that is satisfying is religious messaging. Religious messaging in most religious contexts highlights the family unit. And so the family unit is sacred and what's most important. So there's not a lot of discussion or rhetoric around a single person, what is their family unit and how do they fit into the larger whole, and there can be a lot of sort of crisis, panic, isolation, alienation whenever a single person, or honestly, a person in a relationship, but who has this maybe an unsatisfying relationship, or a relationship that's meh, it's okay, within a religious context, that there can be this sense of, I'm gonna stay in this relationship that's meh because there's no place for me as a single person. You know what I mean? The religious contexts also tend to extremely promote the belief that it is better to marry, or to be, essentially to marry, not to be in a relationship, but like to marry, than it is to have sex outside of that context, or certain kinds of sex. Oh my gosh, hair's doing a weird thing. There are these overt, explicit messages about it is much better for you to marry. It doesn't matter who, so you're not single. And then there's also an example from sacred text, which I would say highlight the preference of the family unit over a single person, but also we're taking that out of historical context. A lot of these were written millennia ago. And so it's like also really important to remember the historical context in which this was written. Why would a woman not want to be a single person in ancient Greece or Rome? There are reasons for that, right? Like, why would a woman not want to, or be able to, be a single person in ancient Egypt, Mesopotamia, Babylon? There are reasons for that, right? And of course, we're looking at these sacred texts. They're going to be talking about a family unit. Then, within the religious context, there's also the context of community expectations. So the religious community does not look at the historicity of the historical context of the sacred text and say, of course, that's why they're saying that. No, it's not that. Generally, it's not that educated of a exegesis, essentially. What's happening is that they're saying, oh, it says to do this, we must do that, without any understanding of history or like modern interpretation, modern day applicability. So there are a lot of religious communal expectations for passing specific milestones. Those milestones would likely be marriage, babies, and then, I don't know, grandbabies? I'm not sure. But that's the thing, that's that normal trajectory. And so there can be this significant fear in these communities about being alone, not fulfilling those expectations. Okay, the fourth category I would find that can influence someone's fear of being alone is cultural messaging. So similar to religious messaging, but I just want to broaden that to culture, society at large, which promotes being in a relationship and being married. There is a widespread societal or cultural expectation. If someone stays single for a long period of time, there's something wrong with them. And a lot of, I'd like to assume, well-intending folks would say to someone who has been single for a long time, oh, I just can't understand why you're still single. Like this assumption, like those kind of comments that make you feel like, oh my God, is there something wrong with me? And so there is this cultural or societal expectation to be in relationship and then potentially to have children. It does take a lot of resistance and like stubbornness almost to be able to withstand those expectations. So if you find yourself single for a long time or in a meh relationship, right, there can be this fear of being alone because it's going to take a lot to meet those expectations. It's going to take a lot out of you to not meet those expectations. Okay, and then the last area that I find really influences this fear of being alone as it affects your ability to find love, satisfying, healthy love, is aging. This is a biological one that I think we might not talk about enough, But I talk about this with some of my therapy clients, that it can be actually scary to age alone and age without a partner. And there are things that you're going to have to do by yourself. There are going to be things that you are going to feel like you don't have that support of someone 100% being in your corner. And that might or might not be true, but that sentiment is scary. This actual aspect of aging can motivate somebody to be in a relationship that might be meh. It might not be like the most life-giving relationship or the most secure attachment, because there is this fear of being alone. One of the ways that I start working through this with my clients is to practice spending time alone. This is a little bit like exposure therapy. You go from spending a little bit of time alone in a comfortable context to becoming less and less comfortable. So maybe if there's a coffee shop that you like, you go one morning and instead of getting it to go, you sit in the coffee shop alone and drink your coffee. And like maybe you bring a book, but it's a practice of sitting there by yourself, being alone, and like being with whatever comes up for you, whatever that makes you feel. Then you might move to a park with a book or a sketchbook or on a walk or something like that. Maybe then going to a movie by yourself. People tend to have like really strong opinions about going to a movie alone. Going to dinner by yourself, and then maybe solo traveling. So the important thing here is that you are going little by little. Like you're not going from being afraid of being alone to solo traveling too much. So start with the coffee shop and then go little by little. And I really do think that as you begin to become more comfortable with spending time alone, you can actually, one, enjoy spending time with yourself, which is hugely important. But you can also then like find a relationship because it's a great relationship. You're not finding something because you were avoiding or afraid of all these other things. You're finding something because it's so good. So I really wish that for you. I'm so glad that you've been here. Just as a reminder, you can join my monthly, bi-weekly, not sure, newsletter. You can take the quiz on my website to see if you have religious trauma. The links to all of those are below in the description. If this is your first time here, and thank you so much for being here and for watching. I hope to see you again. If you are a returning friend, I'm so glad that you've come back, and I look forward to meeting you again. Be well.